Welcome to Arrow's Technical Assistance video series on cottage foods. This is the 6th video in the cottage food series. The others can be found at Arrow's website, which is www.aeromt.org. This session will cover specific questions about completing the cottage food registration application. We will hear from Michael Dorshorts, a county sanitarian in Missoula, with his insight into the application process. In 2015, the Montana legislature passed the Food Modernization Act, which allowed for the creation of the Montana Cottage Food Program. This law outlines what food can be safely produced in home kitchens and sold to the public. At the timing of this video, in June 2021, the Montana legislature has passed a new law known as the Montana Local Food Choice Act. This law will significantly change what types of food can be sold as homemade food products, but these foods are separate and distinct from cottage food products. At this time, this legislation does not make any changes to the cottage food program or to farmers market statutes, but it will likely have significant impacts on how these two programs operate. Please refer to the DPHHS and Arrow websites for more up-to-date information as the local food choice law is put into effect. As current law allows, the cottage food program is housed in the Department of Health and Human Services, the Consumer Safety Division, with local oversight from environmental health officers and county sanitarians. So the county reviews applications and the state issues the registration. The DPHHS website is an important resource for cottage food law and additional information. And it is also where you can find the application. So the cottage food registration application allows sanitarians the ability to determine if an operator is creating a product that is safe for public consumption. The fundamental foundation of the cottage food program is allowing for the production of non-potentially hazardous foods. So these are foods that are based on composition and production pose a minimal risk for causing foodborne illness. So these are often items that don't need to be stored under refrigeration or are considered shelf stable. And this is why there are only certain foods allowed to be sold under the cottage food program. Other factors included in the application and review process are an operator's general food safety and sanitation practices, your water source and sewage disposal, which is common to all food establishment inspections and registrations, and then a review of a product's additives and allergens. Again, the basis of the review process is to determine whether or not a product is safe for human consumption. And therefore, the review process includes the following steps: recipes, process, review of packaging, labeling, and cleaning practices. In this video, we will focus on recipes and labeling. So the first step in the registration review is to review recipes. And there's kind of 3 main points to remember in this process. First is a recipe must be submitted for each and every product that you are submitting approval. So for instance, if you're submitting for 10 different cookie recipes, you would need to submit 10 recipes and 10 corresponding labels, even if the recipe is just a modification. So in this example, we see chocolate chip cookies and chocolate chip cookies with walnuts are two distinct products, and therefore require a separate recipe and a separate label. You can consolidate the further steps, so you can consolidate the process, labeling, packaging, etc. But again, they need to have a separate recipe and a separate label. Because one of the main processes of the review is to determine allergens, every ingredient needs to be listed, including sub-ingredients. So for instance, if a soy sauce is an ingredient, instead of just listing soy sauce, you would need to list soy sauce and then the sub-ingredients, so wheat, soybeans, and salt. And then finally, all components of the recipe need to be submitted in a standard measure of weight. So cups, tablespoons, teaspoons, pinches, those are all measures of volume. And you need to convert all of those measures of volume into a standard measure of weight, such as pounds, ounces, or gram. And they need to be in the same unit. So this is sometimes a point of frustration and confusion for an applicant. So we'll address why. So again, from the view of looking at food safety, one of the key aspects is determining the potential for causing foodborne illness. And in many cottage food products, risk for illness is determined by the amount of available water. So low levels of water will limit bacterial growth. And in many products, such as jams and jellies, frostings, baked products, etc., this is determined by the amount of sugar. A certain percentage of sugar indicates low levels of available water, and therefore will inhibit the growth of pathogens. So this is something that's very important for approval of recipes. And as a point of reference, products need to be at least 55% sugar by weight or greater. So this is a way to pre-screen your recipes and ensure that your recipes are meeting that threshold. And then there's a few options for completing these conversions. The first is an online calculator. So there's a bunch of different options. If you search food calculator volume to weight, you'll come up with, again, a plethora of options. The nice thing about these online calculators is that they will often ask you about the quality of the food. So meaning, is it flour, is it butter, is it sugar? And then they will include the measure of density in that conversion. Another option is to use a standardized chart like the one that's pictured here. And again, you'll see that this also includes a little bit of information about what the product is that you're converting. Because as you can see, a cup of flour, butter, and sugar weigh significantly different amounts. So you can't just use a straight conversion for all different food items. And then the third option is, again, to utilize a kitchen scale, which if your recipes are close to that threshold, it's a scale is advantageous because it gives you an accurate measure. So the second thing we will cover is labeling. So again, from the perspective of making sure that we are listing all allergens, the state specifies very specifically what needs to be included on a label. It at minimum needs to include these things. You can also include other information, but again, at minimum, these things need to be included. So first is the name of a cottage food product, and this is a common name, so chocolate chip cookie, blueberry muffin, etc. The second is including your ingredients listed from heaviest to lightest. So the thing in the recipe that has the most weight down to the thing with the smallest weight. And again, this is where you need to denote all sub-ingredients. And they can be listed in parentheses following the main ingredient. You need to list net quantity or weight. And then again, FDA allergen labeling requires disclosure and labeling of these 8 different allergens. And then in addition, each label needs to include your name and address and this specific disclosure. So made in a home kitchen that is not subject to retail food establishment regulations or inspections. So all cottage food products need to include that disclaimer. And finally, all font needs to be 11 point or greater. So what we see here are a couple different options and examples. So over on the right, this is a resource put out by a cottage food educational organization out of Texas. and they clearly denote some of the different aspects of the label. One thing that's useful here is that you can list allergens and then circle the ones that are present. And then over here, we just see an example. This is actually from a printing website that has some food specific and cottage food specific templates. So this is just an example of how you could have a label that's more specific to your name, your logo, your business, maybe contact info. And then you could have a second label, so a different sticker that includes the ingredients, allergens, etc., so that you can be, that those secondary labels can be a little bit more unique to the different products. So now we will hear from Michael Dorshorts. Again, he's an environmental health sanitarian with the Missoula City and County Health Department. Welcome. We have with us today Michael Dorshorts. He is a licensed registered sanitarian from Missoula County, and he is going to share his perspective on cottage foods. So thank you, Michael, for being here with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Great.
Can you start by telling us what your background is and what you do for Missoula County?
Yeah, absolutely. What I do for Missoula County could go on for a long time in our role, but so my education formally is in biology, biological education, and then my advanced degrees in chemistry. And then my job title here is as an environmental health specialist too. I'm a sanitarian with the health department here. I work in the licensed establishment division of the health department, environmental health department. My job is to inspect all of the different licensed facility types that we have. And then I also review new applications, remodel applications, change of ownerships, things like that. So people can get new licenses or renew licenses for facilities. And then my official registration and licensure is as a registered environmental health specialist and a registered sanitarian.
Great. And kind of outside of cottage food, so environmental, your office would inspect all licensed food establishments, is that correct? Or how does that work?
Yes, both, we don't inspect cottage food, but we inspect temporary food establishments, retail food establishments, both brick and mortar and mobiles, and then wholesale food establishments. And then we also license and inspect public accommodations, so hotel, motel, bed and breakfast, tourist homes, daycares, schools, not just the kitchens, but the entire school under the new school rules that I helped write with the state over about the past 5-6 years. And then body art, so piercing, tattooing, permanent makeup, water features, pools, spas, splash decks, spray decks. We do truck wreck investigations. We do foodborne illness investigations. We do a lot.
Yes, you sound very busy.
Yeah, every day, every way.
Great. Well, thank you for taking some time to speak about cottage food with us.
Sure.
Can you tell us what the role of a county sanitarian is in relation to cottage foods?
Yeah, thank you for that. Essentially what the role is as a point of knowledge. So we'd love to work with the community, especially operators, to help them operate more safely. We know we're that community resource for operators, and we want to be seen as that. We really hope people use us as such, because in a lot of ways we're a totally free expert resource for them. So the more people reach out, the better that they can operate. We're not business managers, but at the same time, we can help them understand how the rules apply, why they apply, and help them streamline their operations so they can actually, make more money as well as keep people safe. Initially, people, especially cottage food operators, would contact us for information about how to obtain the application package, where to submit that to get their cottage food operator registration, and then also if their foods that they're thinking about would be considered cottage foods.
Great. So helping them understand what would fall under the cottage food registration and or not.
Exactly.
Great. And Can you go through the process? So say someone's just getting started in submitting the application. Can you walk us through what that registration process looks like?
Sure. And with our department especially, it's always most efficient and effective to communicate with us over email. Certainly love phone calls, have no problem talking to people. An initial phone call always works really well, and then we just follow up with emails after that. The great thing about that is that you never have to come to our office if you don't want to through the entire process. You could, we can send you the link to the Cottage Food application. You can complete that, email it back to us. We give you a phone number to call in our front desk to pay that one-time Cottage Food registration fee of $40. And then everything can be handled by email from then on. So that's a big advantage. And I don't know how far you want me to go on the rest of that, but.
Well, I guess maybe your insight into, so the review consists, maybe we'll go through the application on this video, but kind of generally what it consists of and how long it might take.
Oh, sure. So we'd be looking at the recipes that were involved, the labeling of the final product. We'd want to know how you were going to do these things, how they were going to do them safely, ensuring that they understood and even help them understand by having them submit a little schematic drawing of where they're going to work in their home to help them understand how to keep that space safe while they're processing that food, and then as well how to complete other safety steps like cleaning and sanitizing, handling and hygiene, things like that.
Great. So obviously your background and your view is ensuring that there's no unintended or unknown steps where somebody might be creating an unsafe food product that they might not even realize.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's multiple different ways that can happen. It's starting from the source of the products that are being used as ingredients, whether or not those are even from approved places. That's sometimes or quite often knowledge that an average person in the public would not have, and that's a resource that we can be to help track down that information for them, make sure that they're starting with the right ingredients, and then working through that whole process to make sure everything's safe. We know that nobody in the public is wanting to make a food that's going to get somebody sick or kill them, and obviously we don't want that to happen. So that's how we help operators through that process, so they can avoid hurting anyone and destroying or damaging their business, and then we can keep people safe.
Great. And I'm sure it all depends, but the registration, about how long does that usually take?
It all depends on the numbers of applications that we have in front of us. Generally speaking, a couple of weeks from the time that it's submitted complete and paid. So that's the big question right there. Is quite often we'll get applications that haven't been completely filled out, and I think it's just people, they look over questions, or they think they're going to come back to them and then forget, or they just don't know what an answer is, so they think it's better to put nothing than something, and so that takes a little bit of time too. So once we get that application complete, it usually takes just about a couple of weeks to get them turned around.
Okay, great.
And then also, I'm sorry, the number of menu items too, because we'll have everything from 2 or 3 items to 300 items. So obviously 300 is going to take longer.
Right. And can you walk us through generally what would happen if a recipe needs modification, or what that might look like?
Sure. And that's the advantage of working over email, is that any questions that we have, we'll send those out to the applicant. They can address them, send that back to us, and we'll work back and forth collaboratively over email to get them to the point of that approval of their registration. And a really big tip that I would give to anybody wanting to submit a Cottage Food registration application is to make sure that they include every menu item that they could possibly think they would ever want to do. Because if they wanted to add new menu items after they'd already been approved or change recipes around, then they would have to start all over again with the entire application. So even if they didn't think it'd be something they want to add, a year down the line, because we only look at Cottage Food registration applications once in the life of the application or the registration, it's really best to put everything in there you think you might do, so we can get it all approved at once ahead of time.
That's a great tip. So even like variations.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you had, say you wanted to make red velvet cupcakes and, chocolate cupcakes and vanilla cupcakes, and you wanted to have buttercream icing and cream cheese frosting and, just a regular simple syrup. But you were going to have, a red velvet cake with each one of those three and a chocolate cake with each one of those three. So each variation requires a separate label submitted along with it. You wouldn't necessarily need a separate recipe for each variation, since we'd already have the recipes for the icing or for the cake, but each variation combination would need its own label.
Right. Each one is a separate item. But
exactly.
Okay. That is good to know. Are there other kind of common questions that you guys see, or things that come up regularly that we could help just preempt those questions for you?
What I had stated earlier about making sure you've submitted complete, making sure you submit all your label examples along with it. There is, we provide in the application on the last page an example that comes from the state of an approved label. So using that as your template is huge. Because it's all laid out there for you. You don't have to get fancy. It doesn't have to have fancy script or anything. If you just use normal print block type letters and create your labels the same way that the labels are in that example, that's going to move the application along a lot faster. Also, making sure that the ingredients are listed by order of weight. That's another big thing that we have an issue with in the applications, is people not submitting their recipes with their ingredients listed with units of weight on them. People will often have units of volume, like teaspoons, cups, pinches, things like that. We need units of weight for those. And it's pretty easy to Google conversions from measurements of volume to measurements of weight, and all of those are really accurate. So it's not like it's other things in the internet where you Google it and you get really weird results. Most everything you get back on that is going to be accurate. But most of them even go down to give you the units of weight for a pinch, what is known by a pinch. So that's really helpful too. And then the advantage to the registrant for having those units of weight already when they submit is that it's required, because we have to make sure that we know that there's enough sugar content, that it's going to be a safe product, or that we have the right quantities of the products in there. Not only do we need that for our end, but it helps them on their end when writing the ingredient list on their labels, since they have to write that by order of weight. So then they could list all they have to do is look at the recipe, go from the heaviest thing down to the lightest thing, and that's first in your label down to last in your label. Another big issue that we see is in the label for the ingredients not breaking down ingredients by the ingredient component. Okay. So say you were going to use butter. Well, butter is not just butter. Butter has other components to it. So it might have salt, enzymes, milk cultures. So you need to break down those sub-ingredients as well as the ingredients. And that's another thing we could be an outreach for too. You can certainly take a stab at it yourself. And then if we see there's issues there or you have questions to ask about it, we can certainly be a resource to help with that. But all of those little things like that will help the application process go faster.
Great. Yeah, and I'm sure that you see common thing, you probably see the same 25 ingredients over and over and over again.
Yeah, quite a lot. Yeah. And then, that's another good point too, is be really careful if the ingredient you're wanting to use is something new and flashy and kitsch, because it may not be something that's approvable as a food, let alone approvable as a cottage food.
Great. And that's a good point. We will make sure that we include some resources and identifying what's recognized as safe on this video. That's a good point.
In the Nina probably covered this too, but the state has great information on some Texas authorities who already have lots of recipes and ingredients that would already be approved as a cottage food in the correct weight measurements. So that's a good resource too, is reach out to the state and get a hold of that information.
Great. Well, do you have any other random tips for a cottage food business?
Just being thorough, setting out on this well ahead of when you actually want to start processing. A lot of times we'll get people who submit one day and think they're going to be approved the next day and operating the next week. And so, that's not how it works. We have to make sure things are safe, and that takes time. And there's lots of other applicants besides that person, as well as not just cottage food applicants. There's lots of other jobs, as I said in the beginning of this video, that we do as sanitarians. There may be days like, a year and a half that we dealt with a novel global viral pandemic, where there are things that are higher priority that we have to deal with first. And just because COVID's starting to become something that's manageable and an endemic rather than an epidemic, that we still have lots of other things that can come up and be a priority in our days. Floods, fires, sewage leaks, truck wrecks, foodborne illness complaints at facilities that we need to investigate, things like that.
Right. Well, I know from a consumer, knowing how well the knowledge base that sanitarians have and the extent to which they review cottage foods, it certainly leads a level of trust and transparency and reassurance for a consumer. So appreciate all that you do with that.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, and our goal is always to approve people. We don't go into any application with the idea that we're not going to approve them, because that's just a waste of our time. Why are we even looking at it if we're going to approve it? So we always go into our applications with the goal of approving. So that'd be a good thing for people to understand too. We're on your side. We're not trying to prevent you from doing what you want to do. We just have to make sure it's done safely, because that's our only look at that product is when we're going through that cottage food operator application.
Right. Great. Well, Michael, thank you so much for your time, and we appreciate all that you do to keep all of us safe on so many different levels. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Couldn't do it without the team that's here. We all work pretty hard, and all of our efforts are to just help the public be safe. So thank you for recognizing.
So a quick follow-up on a couple of additional resources described by Michael. So first of all ingredients need to be considered safe food additives. So anything that is regulated as a controlled substance by the state, such as alcohol or THC products, are generally not allowable under cottage food law. Secondarily, all additional ingredients must be considered GRAS ingredients, which are basically FDA designated as generally recognized as safe ingredients for food. Also, Michael mentioned it is possible to use standardized recipes. So cottage food laws are similar between states. So a good place to start might be to utilize a recipe that is approved by another state's cottage food law. Again, as a starting point, there are some differences between state law. So just because it's approved in one state doesn't mean it's approved in Montana, but it is a good reference point. And the same with extension agencies. They often have recipes or procedures and processes for such as drying fruit that could be utilized in the state of Montana. So both of these, the GRAS ingredients and links to standardized recipes, can be found at the Arrow website.